Hey, everybody. We'll get started a few minutes after the hour. I posted a link to our awesome agenda today. Please mark your attendance, and if you have any items you would wish to add to the agenda, any opens, please do so right down the aisle. Start in just a couple minutes.
Rob, were you the one that said that you knew people at the CVE process, or was it somebody else?
I know people that are part of the CVE group, yeah.
I think I was reaching out to David instead of you, and I should have been reaching out to you. All right.
David also knows people, but
they never got back to me. That's why I'm asking.
Oh. Well,
I'll ping you on Slack afterwards.
Groovy. I'm going to step away right at the end of this meeting, but I will take a look at it first thing tomorrow morning. See what I can track down for you.
Sounds good.
We'll post the link to our agenda again. If anyone's interested, please add some items down below, like Mr. Scovetta is at the moment, and mark your attendance. Get rolling here in just a minute.
Rob, what's your internal soundtrack? You're bopping pretty hard right now.
I am humming Ricky Don't Lose My Number.
Nice.
Don't know why.
You know, you just don't question these things. Just roll with it.
Indeed.
Hey, Rob, if I had a topic for discussion that that I was hoping to chat about today, where's a good place for me to add that?
Right there in our meeting agenda.
Oh my God, the timing was impeccable there. Magic.
Oh, amazing.
Thanks so much.
You're very welcome. All right. It is 3 after the hour. Let's get rolling. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the February 7th edition of the OpenSSF's Vulnerability Disclosures Working Group. I'm Krobe, and I'm here to be our meeting facilitator. Do we have anyone this is their first time attending that wanted to introduce themselves and say hello to all your new friends?
Yes, I would like to. Hello, I'm Kayla Underkoffler. I work with HackerOne, and I am the team lead for the Internet Bug Bounty. So, hello.
I've heard of the internet.
Everyone. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just cracking wise.
Oh, the internet. I know. It's like this thing some people talk about. I don't know. I don't.
It's a series of tubes.
That's what I heard.
Well, excellent. Well, welcome, Kayla. Glad to have you. Anyone else? Is it their first time they wanted to say hello to all your new friends?
Sure. So I'm Yotam. I think it's my first time in this specific OpenSSF group. I'm director of vulnerability research at a startup, a cybersecurity startup based in Israel called Resilient.
Late for you.
Yeah, pretty late, but okay. These are my time, actually, so I'm good.
Welcome. Glad to have you. Any other first timers that want to say hello?
I don't know if I introduced myself last week, 2 weeks ago. I don't know. I took a step away from a long time. Did I say hello last week, or was that a different meeting that I said hello in?
Might have been the other meeting.
Okay. Hi, my name is Jonathan Laichu. I have been away from the OSFs for several months now. So I'm back again. I'm no longer with Gradle. I am doing a full-time, I'm a full-time software security researcher, and I was awarded the Dan Kaminsky Fellowship. So I will be spending the next year doing open source security research, finding open source security vulnerabilities, and generating thousands of pull requests to fix open source security vulnerabilities across GitHub and other places. So that's my year ahead of me.
Cool. Welcome back. Any other first timers want to say hey?
I am new to this group at least. Hi, everyone. My name is Madison Oliver. I work at GitHub on the advisory database, working on the curation side of it. I was previously at the CERT Coordination Center. I know some of you from my work there. I am happy to be back.
I just saw art this morning.
Oh, yeah, I saw that too.
The best facial hair in vulnerability coordination.
I think you give him a run for his money.
My braid fell out today. All right. Anybody else want to say hello? We'll get rolling here. We have looks like a stacked agenda of excitement.
Okay, really fast. Hi, I think this is my first to this call. I didn't know. I've got so many calls on my calendar. Time has no meaning. It's the pandemic. Hi, I'm VM Brasseur, but we're all friends here. You can call me Vicky. I am at Wipro. I'm director and senior strategy advisor for open source. And we are really looking forward to throwing a lot of people and helping a lot of stuff with the security.
Awesome. Welcome. So many new faces this week.
And I don't remember if I've been on this call, so I'll say hi in case I haven't, or it's been a long time. Ava Black, Microsoft, pronouns are they, them.
Nice to see you. All right. Anybody else? All right, let's jump into our action-packed agenda. Our friend of the show, Anne, has our first item on the agenda. Would you like to talk about getting maintainer feedback?
Sure. Well, and maybe we should move these around because I don't know if this is however you want to use the time, Crow. I think for a while, this group has been batting around, there's so many things we could do next after we did the CVD guide. What is the most valuable thing to the maintainer community that we could do? And I think for a little while, we're thinking, oh, maybe Alpha Omega was doing something with maintainer feedback or input. We'll wait so we don't, survey fatigue, double up or something like that. I think my understanding, and I see we have Michael Scovetta, so maybe you can correct us, is that pathway is not happening, or at least not maybe happening as soon as we would like it. So I was trying to figure out, do we just try and at least get some signals for reaching out through projects we're all connected with? I put out something on Twitter, so super scientific, clearly no social network bias in terms of who I'd reach. But yeah, just trying to figure out how do we hear from maintainers, the heaps of things we could do, what should we really focus on to be most helpful to them?
I would love that signal. So yes, I think in general, I would rather, I don't want to do anything within Alpha Omega that is better done within a working group. So even to the point, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but just the vulnerability response process from particularly Omega's perspective, whatever I can do to leverage other things to make that happen better is, I don't want to reinvent anything if I can avoid it. So yes, certainly knowing the pain points that maintainers feel today around vulnerability disclosure and whatnot. That would be terrific.
I will say this is obviously my favorite working group out of the foundation, but in my favorite group in the foundation, the Developer Best Practices Working Group, we did a project around the end of the year around giving out multi-factor tokens. And through that exercise, we contacted a lot of different projects and maintainers. So let me circle back to David Wheeler. He was kind of leading the charge. And let me see if we have any open kind of door openings we potentially could step in there and get some more scientific data around how maintainers would like to see vulnerability disclosure go a little better. I do say that at every working group. All my children are my favorite. Other thoughts? All right. Well, let's put that in the back of everyone's mind. Ruminate that for the next week or two, and maybe we'll have some ideas. If you have anything, feel free to leverage our mailing list immediately. There's the Slack, and then we have the agenda ready. You could just tag things in there for next time. Mr. Scovetta has our next exciting open. The floor is yours, sir.
Awesome. So for Omega specifically, we're going to be finding, when we find a vulnerability, we want to be able to report it. We want to report it, confidentially and all that stuff. We're just getting started. So, we're trying to think in advance of at the point where we need to be efficient in how we disclose. I'm trying to do the thinking now so that I don't need to do it later. The question I have is, what would the best methodology be for finding the maintainer, contacting them, giving them enough information so that they can start with themselves, start looking at the report or whatever we generate, but also be available for the inevitable back and forth. I don't think we need to be so high scale that everything needs to be automated. I also don't think that's the right engagement model, and it doesn't feel good as a maintainer to just have things kind of chucked over the wall at you. But we've been thinking about, and full disclosure, we've been thinking about, like, is there a place for LFX security here? Is this something that would be better for HackerOne kind of engagement? Is it GitHub? Do we have to build something ourselves, or is email just fine? If it's email, well, because these are all going to be critical 0 days, do we, what should we do in terms of, public keys and how do we find them, and how do we, like, we immediately go down this rabbit hole of pain, so purpose of this is, I'm sure you all have thought about these things a lot deeper than I have, so I would love to learn from you and hopefully make it better 6 months from now.
Saw Anne's hand first, and then Jonathan, please.
Yeah, I would love to hear more about your pain, presuming that, let's say that, or I guess my first tack would be to, go through whatever security disclosure policies the projects have. So I'm curious, in that lens, are you anticipating that the projects are not going to have disclosure policies? Are you anticipating that, they might not be as responsive as you like, and so you need to decide your own policy of, this is when we publicly release something?
It's all of that. So to be clear, we haven't started actively. We're still kind of starting the motor. So I anticipate the answer will be, yes to everything. Some projects will not have any disclosure policy. Some projects will ghost us. Some projects will be very responsive, but require a lot of engagement on our side. And if there's a more efficient way, I don't want to say I just want to outsource the problem someplace else, but I want it to be done most efficiently globally, which may mean us doing less, or it may mean that we have to do it all, in which case we just need to plan for, this many people doing it as opposed to this many people. So I am kind of perhaps looking for the problem before I'm feeling it yet. But.
Any follow-up, Anne?
Yeah, well, maybe you could. So my understanding, the alpha side of the project is projects that you're very actively engaging with, kind of like a one-on-one consult style thing. And Omega is more, you're going to have a group of security researchers looking. I don't know what's going to be considered in scope and out of scope for them.
Right. So for Omega, if you just think of it as this giant black box that runs lots of tools, and let's just say it has magic in it that generates high quality findings that still need to be triaged, but they'll come out and they'll come to someone representing the Omega project. So paid staff, let's just call them. they'll look at it, they'll say, yep, this is a totally legit issue. This needs to be reported. At the point they make that determination, now the response process starts. And I want that to be as, and so that's really what I'm talking about. I want that process from there out to be as efficient as possible. So these will be projects with which we have no prior relationship with. We'll be looking up the maintainer on, wherever we can find it, the same as anybody else, and kind of going from there.
All right, Jonathan was next, and then Ava.
Jonathan, you're on mute.
It's hard to hear you from space.
You're still on mute.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Laichu, and I've had this exact problem, and I've been trying to solve this exact problem for a long time. And this actually dovetails perfectly into the exact topic that I have listed below yours, which is how I do my disclosure process. And so I have a GitHub. The problem that I keep running into is twofold. One, can't reach maintainers. Two, how do I keep track of all the disclosures that I have going on at the same time? Because I get a lot going. Like I currently have, 6, 8 something disclosures going right now. And I've been 3 weeks into the Dan Kaminsky Fellowship, right? And so how do I do that? How do I enforce consistently a 90-day disclosure timeline? And so the process that I've been going, and also I have done the process of okay, this group has email disclosure, this group has HackerOne, this group has BugCrowd, this bug group has and this, Google projects have Monorail, right? It is a plethora of different platforms you can disclose via, and it is a nightmare to keep track of all the different disclosure channels that you have, and also all the timelines you have for disclosing via all those channels. Especially with somebody with ADHD and, yada, 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 right? So my answer was to say, I'm done dealing with all these different various disclosure channels. I will disclose that there is a vulnerability via HackerOne, BugCrowd, email, whatever, but I will tell the maintainers or the companies or organizations that I'm reporting to, hey, I have a vulnerability. Give me your GitHub usernames. I will add them to a GitHub security advisory that I've created against my repository, because I can't create GitHub security advisories yet against other projects. There is a plan that GitHub keeps shouting about, saying we're going to add support, we're going to add support, we're going to add support for that, where outsiders can create or security vulnerabilities against projects they don't own, but it's never happened. And so this is my way of inverting that disclosure process. I have just pissed off the Apache Foundation with this process. They're not happy with me. They are saying to me, well, no, we receive our vulnerability reports by email. Please send us to us via email. And my response was, please send me the GitHub usernames of the people you'd like to have involved in this advisory. I've had conversations. The other group that's doing this in a similar way is Hunter Dev. They send a magic link out and they say, here's the report. You want to see the details of the vulnerability? Here it is. You don't accept it, it goes public in 90 days. So it's not perfect, but when you get to the scale of vulnerability disclosure that you're looking to potentially build a lab, right, of people. The GitHub Security Lab has gone the route of we will disclose whatever way the maintainers have chosen and told us to disclose via. I don't have the name GitHub behind me. I'm just an individual, and I also need to keep track of these things. So, it's all, that's my experience. I'm happy to share more, why I got here, the questions that you may have, stuff like that. But, that's where I'm at currently. And I have a whole reason, if you look at my README that I posted in the chat, there's a, why am I doing this and how did I get here sort of thing. So.
All right. Ava was next.
I thought those were some pretty good points. Mine is probably pretty short. I think I've shared this with Michael before, but I want to bounce about everyone else who's on the call, that if this lab or the Omega project does successfully get a bunch of tooling that can find these vulnerabilities in mass, I think one of the responsible things to do is build a gas pedal in. So if there is a backlog, the folks managing that project can just back off, stop discovering new vulnerabilities until they're able to work through the queue they've built up. That has to, I think that has to be part of the process. I'd love other feedback if folks agree or disagree.
I would hope that that gas pedal would also be attached to some sort of money fund where like we can spin out more resources to do, because I feel okay doing that in the short term, like a week's long pause or slowdown. But more than that, then we are like, I feel less comfortable with that going on for a
I
long
can
period of time.
speak to that too in terms of so I'm using CodeQL to find security vulnerabilities across open source, right? And I'm writing these CodeQL queries, and then I'm looking at thousands of projects that are potentially vulnerable, hundreds of thousands of projects that are vulnerable, and you have to at that point pick, okay, like is this somebody's one-off project, or is this important enough to actually report to? And so there is a self-selection, sort of self-filtering that has to go on there. I'm usually using like information like star count, or does this thing show up on Google when you look for it, stuff like that, but primarily star count, because GitHub doesn't render like the criticality score on the project when you're looking at it on GitHub yet. So, project for GitHub is get on criticality score into the user interface would be really nice.
Do you have an additional question, Anne?
A comment, or Ava, I love the metaphor of a gas pedal, because that's kind of where my thinking was going as well. Because if we go back to kind of the mission of the OpenSSF is about improvement of the security of all these packages. So I think we have to keep that bigger mission at forefront and not scope it too far down to be what would I do if I was acting in my capacity as an individual security researcher, because that research is not the end of our mission. And so I'm thinking, there probably needs to be some kind of bigger part of this vulnerability disclosure angle of, okay, so a project does, we have a report for them, they don't have a security policy. The next step for Omega should, from my perspective, should not be to figure out, well, we're gonna, I don't know, spin up a bug bounty or put it over here or XYZ. We should teach this project how to do that, and we should help them to get that set up and then walk them through what this means, because that is improving the security of those packages. I think you're going to need a policy for what happens when, and excuse me, I won't even say policy because it's probably getting confusing. I think you're going to need a tree in your decision branch of what happens when a project is unresponsive, because the goal being improvement of the package. If they are unresponsive, that is a unmaintained package, and that kind of seems like, do people feel like that should be forked and kept in a parallel branch until someone can resolve and remerge, or yeah, those are just kind of where some of the things where my mind was going, and taking that gas pedal and being like, okay, we have 5 projects backed up who have not been responsive. We need to not keep pumping out research, we need to pump out education.
I think that totally makes sense for projects that are willing to accept help, and I hope that the vast majority of them are. The best practices working group is working on a kind of a leave behind packet that would go with any disclosure via Omega, which would include things like, hey, we noticed you don't have a security response process, like here are some templates and here's the CVD guide and things like that. For the ones that genuinely just don't answer the phone, I agree, we have to do something. It may depend a lot on the context. I also don't want to turn OpenSSF into the adopters of unwanted projects at scale. I mean, we would blow up trying to do that, but at the same time, having, and this might get a little controversial, but having an opinion that this project is unmaintained and they do not respond to security vulnerabilities, vuln reports, is an interesting data point, and I feel uncomfortable going that way, mostly as my role is I work at Microsoft, and that the optics of that, at like, if not for nothing else, the optics of that are terrible. But I think that from a consumer of open source, I do want to know which projects I use that are either officially unmaintained or de facto unmaintained. So I don't know how to resolve that.
So
Well,
go ahead,
I
Ed.
was just going to say, I think one lesson you can borrow from security research is, when people decide to share something publicly about, they do frequently list, like, here are all the attempts I made to contact this group, and not in a, shaming way or anything, but just to make it clear that, like, my preference was coordinated disclosure, and I wasn't able to do it this time around.
I have a couple perspectives I'll share. Firstly, as a member of the Great MFA giveaway or Great MFA distribution at the end of last year, I had the great pleasure to try to contact about 35, 40 different open source projects to say, hey, we have some free, awesome multi-factor tokens we'd like to give you, no strings attached. To Jonathan's point is very valid. Every project is different. Everyone wants to be engaged differently, and Anne keyed in on it. Our mission is to help open source maintainers, the open source ecosystem, improve their security. So wherever we can, we should try to reach the developer where they are, whether that is a mailing list, it is a Twitter account, a GitHub issue, whatever that is. And that's I would strongly encourage everyone. And I think that's the advice we have in our CVD guide that this group put together, is that follow that project's desired path, because developers have their own tooling, their own processes, their own infrastructure. So if we can get information in a format that is easily digestible for them, you're more likely to get that output. My second perspective is I had the pleasure to work at a small company called Red Hat that has been doing open source security for 25 years. And how that organization operates is they have a list. That team tracked, as of last year, over 400,000 different packages, projects, components that are part of that portfolio. And they knew how to get in touch with, or at least where to send a signal out to each one of those different projects. And it takes a lot of work. They have a significant amount of people, and that's kind of all they do is coordinate with these different projects. But to where that worked out is by understanding where all those folks were, kind of what projects they're on, you're able to build that rapport so that you could potentially get past the no one answered the combined inbox. Because I know that Kayla is the maintainer for project blah, I'm going to reach her through back channels, or that that there are secret behind the scenes mailing lists where these developers or teams function. And it's a lot of relationship building, and it takes hard work to track this down, to write down who the right people are, what the right method to get to them is. Some of the teams I contacted with the MFA thing, they wanted a Jira issue, which was annoying because I had to get provisioned into their Jira, and now I get all the Jira ticket updates. But it creates a lot of noise, but it's worthwhile because you can build that relationship, and then you have the opportunity to provide those learnings. Like, hey, we noticed you don't have a security policy. Here's a great template you might want to consider. Or you're not using private issues to track security reports. Maybe you want to think about that. Or just document who the heck you are and how the heck you want to get communicated to. That's my 2 cents.
Can I ask you a quick question about that? Were you using was that just for trying to track down who the maintainers of Red Hat software were, or of all open source software? Was that master list?
The Red Hat product security team has a list of all components that are part of that Red Hat portfolio. So that is their artifact they maintain internally. For the Great MFA distribution, we leverage the efforts of not my favorite open source project, but a good project, the OpenSSF's Securing Critical Projects group. they have a list of, air quotes, the most important projects, top 200, I think. And we just started to march down that list, tracking down who those projects were, where they live, how to engage with them. And we started reaching out and said, hey, got an awesome 2-factor token for you.
So something I think we might want to consider then, sorry, this is Vicky from Wipro, is kind of, for better or worse, I think it's valuable to borrow a concept from more of the enterprise space, which is to kind of have account managers, essentially, right? Because the personal touch does matter. Each of these groups does have different touch points that make sense, and keeping in touch with them. And I think this is a valuable way for people to be able to contribute, is to be able to essentially take on, here are your accounts, these 4 or 5, however many accounts that make sense to, but I think that's a really valuable way that we can potentially contribute, and to share the load, because this is going to be a considerable load. We can't really expect like a Rob to take on 40 projects. That's a lot. I mean, having done this sort of thing before in other contexts, that's really a great deal of work that can burn somebody out very quickly. And so having a mechanism to not only split up the list, but also to assign it, and to have kind of a succession plan for handing it off to people, I think that can be very good for allowing us to continue this, to have the continuity that we're going to need in order to maintain this CVE communication across the projects that we select. And that's something I think we should look at, as I know that's looking at tooling and implementation rather than actually the philosophical, theoretical side of things, but it's certainly something that I think we should be considering. And it can help to bring in a lot of people who want to contribute and want to feel like, I am helping with open source security, rah, go me. But this is a way where they can legitimately make a difference. And we can have a method and a process for that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Vicky. One last thought before I turn over to Kayla, is we had talked a very long time ago to the best facial hair in vulnerability disclosure, Art Mannion, and CertCC was toiling away at a tool they wanted to open source, Vince. We had them come do a couple presentations to us, and that was kind of a bug bounty platform agnostic way to try to get all the stakeholders together for a particular vulnerability disclosure and allow the researcher and the reported to team kind of control who's in the read-in list and when and how updates are shared. So that is another option for us if we wanted to reach back out to the CERT folks, the Carnegie Mellon folks, to get them to come give us another presentation, give us an update. And then they were hoping to eventually outsource upstream that work. So that's a possible opportunity for the foundation, is to take on assistance with developing that tool and helping maintain it and evangelizing it as a neutral place that people can go to help share communications around disclosures. And if it hopped out to a bug crowd or a HackerOne, fine, but we're not necessarily constrained to some of those other things that sometimes are distasteful to maintainers. All right, and now I yield the floor to Kayla. I apologize, ma'am.
No, I actually think the platform part of it is really important, to be able to have all the stakeholders all together in one place to be able to discuss whatever whether it's a vulnerability report or anything else really. So I was just going to also add, from the internet bug bounty perspective, when I've been doing all the reach outs for inviting projects to participate in the IBB, it's kind of that same thing of, I'm emailing the teams with, like, you would think it's a happy story. I'm inviting them to partake in this as as a project. And it's definitely, you get mixed feedback coming back from any sort of even response at all. One of the things that I've started to do is I always, of course, we kind of keep the kind of staple enrollment rule of you have to have a disclosure channel for IBB participation for obvious reasons. There has to be something already in place. And so anytime I'm inviting a project, I immediately go for what is their disclosure channel, and then I'll send out that first communication to the group at large. But if I have a connection, I will also try to do that, like simultaneously. If I know that there's a really active maintainer, which is one of the pluses also of when we have projects who are on platform at HackerOne, like they have their program on the platform, it's easier because we know who the active maintainers are who are receiving those submissions and the ones who are engaging. So it's a little easier to reach out to folks when you know who is engaging on the maintainer side. And so I go to GitHub a lot for that as well, for other projects. Like I look for who are the names that keep popping up here. So that's been some of my strategies for reaching out to groups. But even with that, like at this point, I think I've reached out to, we're in early stages, but I've reached out to over 35, and I probably have about, 50% response rate, which isn't bad.
Pretty good.
Yeah, it's not bad. And certainly not everyone has been interested in participating, which is also very fair. Back to that, every project, has their own flavor of things. But I certainly see the value in having some sort of shared communication platform, opportunity, whatever, when you actually disclose a vulnerability in the first place, because then everybody can be in the same place. So whether that's something that would be built, or I know this sounds a little bit silly coming from someone who works at HackerOne. You're probably like, of course you think that's a great idea. But I totally see the value of having everyone be able to come to one place. So even if it's that you're reaching out to these projects through their disclosure channels, but kind of like what was brought up earlier, you're reaching out saying, hey, we found this vulnerability, come here so that we can discuss it with all the stakeholders present. I can see the value in that, although I could also see the pushback from projects. So.
Thank you, Kayla. Did you have another question, Jonathan, or statement?
I had another comment from Michael. So two things that, as you're building out this process, two things that you do need to consider, you don't need to do, but is if you're establishing a lab or a group of people to do this sort of stuff, figuring out what you're going to have for a disclosure policy around like timeline. Are you going to have an enforced 90-day disclosure timeline? If not 45, 45 is pretty standard. In certain places, 90, other places. The other thing that I have run into, I presume that you will run into as well, is I have run into open source maintained by corporations, and you go and email their security email address, and then you get connected to a hacker. Like you email you back, and they're like, here's a HackerOne invite or a Bugcrowd invite. And then you go and click on that HackerOne or Bugcrowd invite, and then all of a sudden you're in a vulnerability or in a bug bounty program, and that bug bounty program has a non-disclosure agreement associated with it.
Ooh.
Right? And so you like get headlong into, and so then instead of a disclosure, you're having a conversation of, hey, I've got a vulnerability. I'm not disclosing here because of your policy. How do you want to handle this? And so that's another reason why I've kind of said, I'm not doing disclosure of vulnerabilities anymore via Bugcrowd or HackerOne, because you keep getting hornswoggled into these vulnerabilities, these non-disclosure agreements that you weren't expecting to be a part of. And so, that's something to keep in mind as part of and so certain, I think that hunter.dev, for example, those guys say, if the company uses HackerOne, we won't engage with that. We won't because we know that there are policies and legal stuff that gets in the way of us disclosing to those channels and stuff like that. So
those are really good points. Thank you. I'm leaning toward 90 days just as a simple,
if you want some
should
really
be kind of non-controversial.
Yeah,
position?
if you want a really good set of justifications to back that up, Google's
Mhm.
Project Zero has an FAQ, and they have a really detailed write-up of why they made the decision to do 90 days.
Yeah.
And or at least why they have a disclosure policy, not necessarily 90 days. 90 days was kind of driven by Microsoft because you guys have like your release cycle is, it gives 3 release cycles to get it out. But yeah.
Cool.
And next up was Anne.
Oh yeah, sorry, I was looking for that Project Zero write-up. No, I got lost my train of thoughts. Oh, Jonathan, what you're saying about corporate programs and reward programs not understanding the difference between open source and their proprietary program software and trying to shovel things through the same program. I would actually really love to educate security groups and OSPOs about the difference between those two and why the VRP you have set up for your proprietary software may not be appropriate for your open source stuff that you have released at one point in time. And you know, in terms of like why I so desperately want this, what should the OpenSSF do for maintainers list, is because I would love to just jump on that, but that might not be the most impactful thing we can do. You know, but be it through other Linux Foundation groups or something, I just think I frequently see that pathway where somebody's trying to report something, has a ton of maintainers at a certain corporation, they shovel it through their corporate program, and their terms are not appropriate for open source software.
I would stretch it to be even wider than that. Any piece of software that is shipped to customers that you are not, it's not just corporately run, should have a CVE associated with it, right? If you are shipping a piece of software, even if it is closed source, right? You are shipping that to end customers, then it should have a CVE associated with it, right? For example, I was the one that found this vulnerability in Zoom. Zoom had a non-disclosure agreement on their thing. That was the kind of vulnerability that, because it went public, there's a long story around this, but Apple was able to patch millions of Macs to remove a remote code execution vulnerability. But that only happened because I disclosed the vulnerability publicly, right? It's not just about open source. It's about, there is software being shipped to customers and there should be CVEs associated with that. So even if I'm looking at closed source software, I have that same policy, because unless I'm looking at like, you know, corporate endpoint, you know, web server stuff, like that's different. But, you know, if it's shipped to customers, it needs a CVE, in my opinion.
Excellent conversation today. Do others have thoughts they wanted to share with the group? All right, well,
I really appreciate everybody's thoughts and feedback and input and all this. Yeah, we'll sync back next time this meeting happens. I'll bring my partner in crime, Michael Windsor, aboard. So we'll kind of continue and iterate on this over time. I think what I'm going to do initially is an initial staffing for Omega. I think we had half of a DevRel function initially. I might bump that to a full DevRel, because even if we wind up finding, you know, whether it's Vince or a Hunter Dev style thing or something else, we still need someone on our side to kind of own this and be passionate about it. And I feel like the security researcher finding the vulns, it may not be the best use of their time or interests to kind of double them up with the coordinated process. That perhaps that's a different, you know, it's just a different person who had different interests and all that. And that might be more effective, but at minimum to have like, to know that we're serious about it by having like someone like that as their day job.
So 2 points on that. One of the things that I've learned is have the person whoever's writing the vulnerability up, write it for public consumption.
Yeah. Because
then it's written once, not twice. I learned that the hard way. There's also a component, I think that this is important too, is that when vulnerability disclosure gets involved, you end up with egos flying around a little bit, right? There's a part of ego and like not, and so separating it may help dampen the like you're ignoring me from the, you know, like this is important and somebody needs to be taking care of this. Yeah.
Yep. Excellent. Thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts on this topic. Hopefully Michael has some things to ponder. Next up, our new friend Kate wants to talk about, oh boy, SPDX. Awesome. I haven't heard S-bomb in hours.
in hours. Awesome. Hey everyone, a long time listener, first time caller. So we we have a release coming up that required us to choose a format for vulnerability data. We went with OSV for that format and how we're going to structure it. I have heard through the grapevine that SPDX is considering their own format when they release their V3. This is like a telephone game, so if someone is on this call from SPDX, would love if you could chime in. But wanted to do a quick gut check on where folks were at with data formatting. Are you all thinking OSV? Are you all thinking a different data format for vulnerabilities? What are your thoughts on formats? I recognize this is a less spicy topic than the one we were previously on, but hoping some folks still have thoughts.
So this is Vicky again. I do have thoughts, mostly because I do participate in SPDX, but I do not participate in SPDX technical, which is where all these specification conversations are happening. I just sort of lurk there because I don't have the cycles to go and catch all the backstory on it. I do know that, yes, you are very correct. They are considering this. I do not know where it is in the list as far as it happening in 3.0 or what it will look like in 3.0. So I can, if you need, I can certainly set up introductions to people who can give you that information. But right now, if you have to choose vulnerability formatting, go with what we have. Because 3.0 is not going to be coming out for a while. I do know that. It is very much in the deep down in the weeds conversation level of things. So we're not going to be seeing 3.0 in the next month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. So it'll be a while. So if you need to do vulnerability reporting, use the format we have, the one that's available, and then SPDX, I know will probably have to flex around that to make things work, or I'm sure there will be some sort of interchange format when that's necessary. But for now, use what you got because vulnerabilities are too important to ignore.
Yeah, last one to that. Vicky, just want to follow up on one thing you said, which was use the one we have. Are you referring to OSV when you say that, or is there a different format that comes to mind as like the automatic choice?
I don't have a horse in that race, so I'm not gonna give any recommendations one way or another. My SPDX friends would like me to recommend some sort of SPDX-ness, but use what you're most familiar with and what's going to be easiest for the team to get information out there, as long as it's a standardized format that is complete enough for you to get your job done. Is that OSV? Great, use that. If it's something else that if Cyclone DX or something has something, then use that. But I have to confess, I don't know enough about that side of it to be able to make recommendations yet. Give me a couple of months.
Same. Thanks so much, Vicky. Did any other folks have thoughts on vulnerability formats, or are you putting your thumb on the scale of one certain format versus another? Would even love to hear a +1 on folks saying, oh, we're using OSV. Like that would be just a great data point.
So we're using OSV, but I have to say that I'm not that familiar with SPDX yet. We're also taking a look at it, but currently we're using OSV. We're building kind of a vulnerability database with data coming from all kinds of sources. NVD and OSV are the main ones, and then proprietary data that we are adding as enrichment. I also know there's a project, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, that it's just starting with the Cloud Security Alliance, which is called GSD, which is supposed to be some kind of a global security database. So maybe it will be nice. I'll try to. I'm also part of that group, so I'll try maybe to ping them to come present it here. But in a nutshell, the aim of the project is to eliminate the gatekeepers. It refers to the ego aspect that was mentioned earlier as well. Kind of something like everyone that thinks something is wrong, security-wise, can submit a GSD entry, basically a vulnerability. And then if it's later revoked or the vendor, then it's all on GitHub, but so you can invalidate it later, but off the bat you can put an entry. There's like a form that you fill out. There's kind of basic syntax around it, and they are also using currently OSV as their go-to format. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
I'll highlight, Kate, that within the vendor community in the industry, they will back the CSAF format. So a lot of industry piece product security teams will use CSAF and participate there. So that's another thing you'll want to consider depending on who the audience is going to be. It's an older, it started off as CVRF and then transformed a couple of years ago to CSAF. So depending on what community you're trying to reach out to, and a lot of times commercial scanners are keying in off that data. So if you are looking to help service that community at all, that's another thing to consider.
Yeah, that's great feedback. Thanks, Rob. If I can make a higher, oh, sorry, I interrupted someone.
I just was curious. So quick, like, I'm not familiar with a lot of these formats. Are all these formats based upon or leveraging CVE as an under the hood identifier, or is that not the case in a lot of these? I'm new in this area, so I'm curious and poking and asking that question in that context.
Most of them, if not all of them, will touch on CVE. They, at least in like the States and Europe, CVE is kind of the common language for sharing most vulnerabilities, although there are different formats, as we just learned today around reporting. For example, like the Cloud Security Alliance has spun off their own vulnerability identifier as well. And it's supposed to be complementary to CVE, but it is potentially different. I know that some Asian countries run their own CVE-like numbering authorities, so you need to be careful. CVE is the most broadly adopted identifier.
Yeah, that just maybe to elaborate on that point. So the GSDB is supposed to have like namespaces. So you have a namespace that it's basically the CVE data, for example, and you can have a namespace that is some kind of even a proprietary scanner can add its take on the vulnerability. And the idea is that you have all of the data of the vulnerability from various places in one place. And then as a security researcher or developer, you have all the data in front of you, and then you can decide what you want to take out of it. But and each namespace can maintain its, for example, if you have an OSV namespace, it will have the OSV format, and if different namespaces can have different formats. Yeah. So.
Awesome. Thanks all. If I can make a high level observation, it doesn't seem like anyone is banging their fist on a table for a specific format. It sounds like folks are noticing many formats, using different formats. Like this is not a issue of passion. Okay, that's a good takeaway.
And as a working group that is part of the Open Source Security Foundation, if we have strong opinions, we think something that adds a lot of value to maintainers in the open source ecosystem, we can help evangelize and get behind any particular standard or some type of Rosetta Stone that is able to jump between them.
It does seem like in terms of interoperability, it would be helpful if we had a position on which format we advocated for. It can really only help the industry if we're all speaking the same language. That's really why we chose to do a little extra work to have our upcoming release formatted in OSB to be sort of part of that solution. I obviously don't work with OSB or am associated with them, so I have no horse in that race, but that does seem to be the horse at the head of the pack. This metaphor is really falling down. But maybe that's something we want to talk about in a future session. Is there a vulnerability format that we choose to collectively advocate for? And if so, we should chat with SPDX about it.
And our kind of mantra is anything that is going to has broad acceptance and is very simple for a developer or a maintainer to incorporate into their workflow, that's a win. That's something we would try to do more education or coach people towards.
I think that's a really valuable thing to consider in future versions, at least, or future calls, at least looking at the available options and reviewing them, and at least looking at the ones that might be very good ideas or alternatives for us to recommend. Because I think that recommendation, working with as many different companies as I do, they're all looking for a recommendation, right? And so we are the group that is best positioned to make an informed decision as to what is or is not going to work. So if anyone ever needs me to bring someone in from the SPDX side who is actually knowledgeable on that crap, please just raise the red flag and I'll do that. I am not that person. I'm just the connector in that particular case.
Has NIST put out any recommendations or standards? I mean, I guess it's US based, but yeah, I'm just wondering if NIST has anything.
NIST would defer to MITRE, which is going to be CVE. All right. Any last minute thoughts before we close our call today?
I would love to schedule that call where we kind of view the different formats and chat about which one we want to work together to suggest. I saw that written down in the notes. Maybe we could put that on the calendar for not next week, but like a month out or so folks have time to prepare. I think that'd be really, really fun and helpful for all of us.
So I put an entry under the last item in the agenda under meeting notes. If I could get some helpers volunteer to help lead the discussion or bring in subject matter experts around the different formats, that would be super groovy. And we will get that set up. We can do a little advertising on the mailing list and Slack and whatnot to try to make sure we get people that are interested show up that might not otherwise be able to make the call. All right, everybody. I really appreciate your time. Awesome conversation today. Thank you to everybody, and we will see you all in 2 weeks, if not sooner. Cheers.